to go ahead and continue because we are going to run out of time again if we're not careful. So I'd like to welcome back the chairman, Adam Smith, and we'll just continue with questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it.
Okay. No, we appreciate you being back. Committee, any questions? I did double check. There were quite a few counties that had inaccurate information on their revenue neutral letter. And I got to tell you, I really appreciate some of the input because I think we can make it even better with some of the suggestions that you've made. So thank you. Any questions? I know Senator Peck might have had some. Senator Owens.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Excuse me, I just came from Ways and Means. So, Mr. Chair, tell me what your thought is on as far as the 10% of the presidential vote. Where did that come from? What's the justification? Give me some insight on that.
Right. I tried to look up the instances that we currently have in statute regarding protest petitions, and most commonly, I ran out of time. My revisor ended up doing it. There's over 200 different statutes that reference a protest petition. Typically, it has been either 5% of the total registered voters or 10% of the voters that voted in the last election. So I just picked, I wanted a hard number for people to be able to go back and look at to know exactly how many signatures they are. In a large community, your number of registered voters could vary week by week depending on how many people are moving in or perhaps moving out. It could be a moving target. So I wanted an exact number that people could go back and look at and say, this is what I need to get for that petition. And if I could add, there was actually a pretty robust discussion in the House Tax Committee on this because we had some people that wanted it to be 20%. They thought that 10% was way too low, but when I was drafting the bill, I talked to a lot of people that had tried a protest petition before. They wanted it to be 3% because that 10% is very difficult to get. Of course, that was without a publicly held petition that people could go in and sign, but traditionally, and this was kind of interesting, it was bipartisan. The people that wanted it lower were the people that had tried this before and realized how hard it was to accomplish. So ultimately, we left it at that 10%. We did move it to the presidential election rather than the Secretary of State's race. That was what the committee felt more comfortable with. They thought that number might be more popular.
Thank you for that, and truly thank you for being here because I think this is such an important topic that it really adds context to help understand where the House is at and some of those conversations that happen. My last question for you, the creation of this Astra Fund and this $60 million, I mean, I haven't actually done the numbers to understand the split, but I'm sitting here going with all of the cities and counties and the taxing entities that would benefit from this. It seems like $60 million is an awfully small carrot to a really, really big horse. So help me understand your thoughts and give me an example of, if you have one, of a county or a city and what they would receive if they followed the prescribed process.
Right, and I apologize, Madam Chair. I have a sheet that PVD had prepared for me. I didn't print that off because it had every single county and city in the state. We could make sure that was accurate. I know Mr. Penner had approached me after the morning committee. We realized there was maybe an incorrect calculation in the Leavenworth County piece rather than the 1.3 million I think I referenced. It'd be closer to $1 million because there was some additional things that were included in that number to kind of grow, or it made it look like more than what it actually was. But for my county, when I was looking at my county, it would be about $30,000 because we're the second smallest county in the state with regards to population. But $30,000 in my county is $1 million. It's roughly, looking at the calculations, and I could try to make that available to the committee if that would be helpful, but it's roughly anywhere between, $0.75 million up to $1.5 million in reference and perspective. So what might be, I'm not sure what Sedgwick County would be. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but it's going to be proportionate to to your valuation and population. If you live in a large district, lots of population, lots of commercial property, it's going to be much larger than obviously the smaller counties.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next is John Donnelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is John Donnelly, and I'm here on behalf of Kansas Farm Bureau and the 30,000 voting members of Kansas Farm Bureau to support broad-based property tax relief. Have you heard that before from me? Anyways, did want to come in. First, I want to apologize. I was not able to be here on the 2 days that you had the hearings on 280, and we provided written support on that. What you've, I think, consistently found from us is that we are interested in finding property tax relief and finding the best manner to provide that property tax relief to our farmers and ranchers and all Kansans in a way that at least minimizes the shifting of the tax burden. We want true property tax relief. I think what the committee has done on both, the committees have done on both sides is you've identified a lot of ingredients. We've supported most of them. And now we're to the point in the session where we have to figure out what we want to do to put in to bake the cake. I would argue that this House Bill 2396, Senate Bill 280, but specifically House Bill 2396 today, is a good approach to address this issue. We have in the past, we've supported tax lids, we've supported the revenue neutral rate. We still support the revenue neutral rate, albeit it is taken, it's repealed in this legislation. And the reason we still support this legislation is we feel that the mechanisms put into this bill with a property tax lid, essentially, a stick and a carrot, I think it's been described as. We believe that that is a better approach, and we will see more local units of government rein in their actual spending. I think one thing that these discussions have shown is that assessment rates, they're set in the Constitution, but assessed values, mill levies, there's the variables are easy to just, as the mayor from Bel Air put it, it's a shell game at some level. But we do believe that this approach, or the approach in 280, would be a more direct approach because it would actually put restrictions on the budget. I would also add the one thing that I think you don't want to forget in this one is this also puts a little bit of pressure on the legislature with the ASTRA fund. And if the ASTRA fund is not funded, then the lid goes away. So it puts a little bit of the onus on you all too to hold up your end of the bargain as you go forward. So anyways, that's our general approach on this issue. We feel like this is a good approach. It needs to be considered. There's also other good approaches that are out there that we've testified in the past, and I'm mainly here. I was going to submit written, but I decided I better come here and get some questions because I imagine there might be a few. So I'll stand for questions.
None?
Well, thanks.
Lucky you. Leah Flider, and I got it right this time. Did I?
You did. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I should have married someone named Tyson or something, right? Would have been easier. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. We're here to primarily focus on the revenue neutral piece because school districts would not be subject to the ASTRA fund that's discussed elsewhere in the bill. We are in favor of this bill because our member-directed policy says that we do favor repeal of the revenue neutral rate hearings. We do believe in transparency, but it is duplication because every year for their budgets, school boards put together their budget in a series of public meetings, and then we hold a budget hearing August or September, that is a public meeting that is open to public comment. And so based on our member policy, we support this bill because it repeals revenue neutral. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Leah. I have a question for you.
Sure.
So revenue neutral is not the same as a budget hearing. Revenue neutral is a vote to increase property taxes and a notice before the property taxes go up.
Right.
So with that understanding, you still support repealing it?
Yes, because we publish our budgets ahead of time with the various mill levy rates. And then we end up typically holding the revenue neutral rate hearing and the budget hearing on the same evening, just a few minutes apart. So it is duplicative.
Absolutely acceptable. And it's interesting because I was talking to a county commissioner, and I won't take up much time because I know we're in a hurry. But the taxpayer has no notice, no advanced way to know what possibly could come with tax increases. They get this letter in August, September, they're able to budget for possible increases coming in December. You still support repealing it?
Yes, because there is quite a bit of advance notice when the board is putting together its budget, when it is holding the budget hearing. So it looks like you and I are going to agree to disagree on this one.
Because that's not for individual property owners, that's
Okay.
the entire budget. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This isn't, excuse me, this isn't the case in my district, but I've heard that there are, well, we had a bill earlier this year that said that school districts had to allow for public comment in their meetings. And I had school districts say they didn't like that. And I've had people say that there are school districts that require the agenda to be approved so far in advance that people don't get to have public comments. Am I wrong? I mean, can school,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
As far as I know, that's not the case with the budget hearing because those budget hearing notices are in statute.
And just because you have a hearing, does that allow public comment?
Yeah, the public comment is required at the hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Leah, I'm gonna try to say this as friendly as I can, but I'm certainly not trying to come after you, but it seems like to me you're in support of this because not only does it eliminate the one requirement that you have for true transparency mailed to every single taxpayer, but it completely exempts you from any type of restrictions on property taxes. Help me understand that because we just sat in Ways and Means. And it's interesting when you come straight from there to here where this was provided, where we're currently showing that cash balances for funds in the USD system, so this is statewide, cash balances are sitting at $2.9 billion in reserves and in additional funding. So you don't believe that there is any room for the legislature to restrict your ability to increase budgets and raise funds?
If I may.
Yes, please.
I know that was passed out in Senate Ways and Means. I would say that 2.9 million is probably the high point throughout the year. Like a lot of businesses, you may have cash balances at a certain point in the year, and then it's, it goes down as your business year goes on. So I would caution against saying that we're sitting on this, pile of money. A lot of times it's encumbered. A lot of times it's something that could not be used to buy down property taxes. So I know that was a discussion today in Senate Ways and Means. I'm glad that error from last week was corrected because that was quite troublesome and quite problematic. Our real issue with the revenue neutral piece, Senator, has been also when the taxpayer gets their notice, and, I think I've mentioned, I live in Manhattan, it tends to be the valuations are going up and up. My property taxes are going up on my house. When you look at the 20 mil levy, then when you get that notice, it looks like USD 383 has jacked the mill levy. But that's a mill levy, that 20 mils is set by state law. And so if there's an increase in the amount of money that is raised by the 20 mils, it's because of the valuation increase, not because of a decision that the school board has made. And so then you have folks coming to the school board meeting saying, you raised my 20 mils, and, we did not. So that has been rather confusing for taxpayers because that 20 mils is levied statewide and then it's equalized out to the rest of the state. Did I answer your question? I may have gotten a little off track.
So, thank you. Senator Starnes, and then do you need to follow up? Okay. Senator Starnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Leah. Just pointed out too, and I understand about unencumbered cash balances, and for schools to utilize those as a savings account, I can't get a capital improvement bond passed, and I'm saving money forward to ensure that I can get something done for buildings. And I know as a former superintendent, we utilize that to that extent. So I agree with you totally. If you're sitting on this cash, and what's the purpose of? Are you just continuing to pad, quote, your pockets, or is there a purpose in what you're doing?
Right.
Thank you. We need to stay on the bill committee. I'm sorry. Those are great questions. I wish we had more time for it, but we do have more conferees. So thank you. Next up is Jay Hall. In committee, I do plan on working this legislation today, so hopefully we won't run out of time.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am Jay Hall, Deputy Director and General Counsel for the Kansas Association of Counties. KAC supports this bill for a couple of reasons that I want to highlight before I take questions. The first is that this bill represents a partnership between local governments and the state. One of the things that we talked about at the KAC annual conference when we were working through our legislative platform was a desire for local governments and the state to be partners rather than adversaries, because I think it benefits our taxpayers when we at the local level and you at the state level are working together rather than when we are pointing fingers and pushing and pulling against each other. So that's one reason why we support this. The second reason that we support this, though, is that because this bill reflects the natural progression of how our costs will work, because it's very difficult to stay revenue neutral simply because our costs are also going up. The cost of the things that we buy, particularly because we don't buy a lot of normal consumer goods. So when the price of gravel goes up, average consumer probably doesn't notice the price of gravel increasing. But if you talk to any road supervisor around the state, they will tell you that they have felt the impact of that. The price of chemicals to kill weeds isn't something that most consumers, again, buy in bulk. But you talk to our weed departments and they can tell you about that. So this reflects that, because during our budget hearings, what is often lost is the fact that we have to budget in those increases on an ongoing basis, and it's very, very difficult to stay flat. I don't want to take up too much time, so I will take questions at this point.
Thank you, Jay. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next conferee is Jim Howell. Welcome, Jim.
Members of the committee, thank you for having me today, Madam Chair. You have my testimony. I just want to briefly summarize. I'm testifying on behalf of the County Commission, Sedgwick County Commission. I'll make three technical corrections and technical recommendations to this bill. One of them, I'm a little bit personally indifferent on. My first paragraph talks about the elector-approved bonds versus just GO bonds. It's a concern. We have we call a AAA bond rating for Sedgwick County. There's some concern that by having this written the way that it is, it might affect our bond rating, which can impact our interest rates for future debt. That's a concern. We talked about that on the first paragraph of my testimony, and that's on the bottom of page 2 in the bill. The second thing is dealing with the way the money is divided up, similar to HB 2377. There is a penalty if we lower our mill levy on sales tax revenue. We actually lose some sales tax, and we think this is potentially divided up the same formula. We'd like to see that done on assessed value. It's a technicality. It's not a major part of this bill, and honestly, I don't know that I would not hold this up because of that problem. And thirdly, it talks about the county clerk. I think it needs to say, and this is on page 1, line 30, that should say election official for the county. That's a technical adjustment. Now, having said all that, I'm going to do this as quickly as I can, so you're out of time here, but I would just say that, again, this focus is on, again, the focus for this legislature this year seems to be laser focused on the appraisal process. This is the only bill that's been discussed this year that I can think of that actually deals with the issues of spending. This actually puts something in place where the people themselves can rein in the level of spending. It does allow for some small growth, which again, our R&R policy assumes you're going to live under some previous year's tax levy, and at some point you're going to break through that. When you do, sky's the limit. There really is nothing to stop it at that point. Sedgwick County, last year we grew our budget by about 7%, and I think that's horrible. At the end of the day, there are some outliers on the appraisal process, and I hear stories about those folks. I'm going to jump ship here I gave you guys 2 charts with a bunch of red dots on there. Let me explain these very quickly. The appraiser in Sedgwick County, works for the state. Actually, that's a big debate. Actually, he needs to work for the state. He's a county appraiser, but he actually answers to PVD. You have two charts. One's a 2020, you look at the bottom scale. One says 2024 appraised value, one says 2025 appraised value. We have over 100,000 properties in Sedgwick County that were appraised. He doesn't know which ones are going to sell. And you'll notice that 7 out of 8 of those red dots are above that purple line. That's your 0-0 line or your 1-1 line. In fact, the blue line right above that is the average of all the red dots together. What I'm saying is he tends to undervalue property. Now, there are some outliers. The ones that are below that purple line, they're victims. They're overpaying property taxes, and that is truly a concern. Those are the ones we hear about. They're the ones that are calling us. They're mad, and I understand why they're mad. I get it, too. I'm mad, too. The guys on the other side of that line, frankly, they're paying less than their fair share because they're undervalued properties. What you see, though, is there's a very wide scatter of those red dots on that 2024 chart. When you sell a property, the appraiser gets a copy of the sales report, and he goes to the 2025 chart, see how those dots have moved in. They're very close to that middle. I'll argue, in general, the appraisal process is not broken. It has a problem with the wide bound of error, and I think you can focus on those, especially those properties that are overvalued. They need to have their own technical correction in legislation to address those properties specifically. And I have some ideas on how we should do that. Let me move on here. What this does, though, it apportions the tax burden based on people's property value. Tax burden is set by governing bodies. We set that tax burden. We want to, I think what this bill does, it incentivizes us to be conservative. I'm a conservative Republican. This holds us essentially to a CPI level of growth. In Sedgwick County, the new construction is hardly anything. So at the end of the day, CPI is what's driving our budget levels. And if we go past that, it puts the power back in the hands of the people. Last election cycle, for president, we would have to, for this law, the 10% would be 21,500 valid signatures to stop our growth that goes beyond CPI. That's reasonable and that's doable. So our budget is doable, 2.5%, 3.5%, whatever it is, based on yearly economic measurements. And then getting those signatures is doable. I have a few more points I would love to make, and I would encourage you guys to put transparency back in this bill. I support truth and transparency. I think publishing our budget, having public hearings is reasonable. We've done that. And by the way, almost everybody who showed up at our hearings is advocating for more spending. No one advocates for more cuts. Having said that, I want to be transparent. I want to publish our budget and have a roll call vote, publish the results of that vote, and have public hearings on our budgets. We have to do those things. And I look like you're about to cut me off, so I'll stop. Thank you so much.
I'm not going to cut you off, but we do want to see if there's any questions, and we need the opponents to be able to speak too. They haven't had a chance yet. And so Senator Corson, then Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the questions I have is, I had some municipalities reach out to me. Should there also be an exception for debt service levies in here? I know that was a concern that was brought to me by some of my municipalities. I know that had been part of previous tax lids, things of that nature. Maybe I should have asked that to the House chairman, but I'm wondering if that, to me, that was expressed to me that would be an important addition to the bill. Wanted to see your thoughts on that. Thank you, Commissioner.
There are some things we have no control over. They're even statutorial that mandates we have to have a certain levy for certain things. We have no control over those things. And that's one of the challenges of the revenue neutral rate law, is because for me to actually stay under RNR, I actually have to pull money from something else to fund those mandated spending levels. It's a very interesting discussion. I would tell you my CFO would say yes. I think there's two sides of that. I'm personally not that worried about that particular thing. I would not slow this bill up because of that concern. I think this bill is good, and I would rather see this bill pass. But I do think there is a problem with that, and I think it's very technical, and it's probably beyond what you guys have time for.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Commissioner Howe, you didn't mention or bring up the Astra Fund.
I know it's on my testimony. May I just share real quickly? We in Sedgwick County have about a 28.7 mil levy. Right now we're at just under $200 million in property tax. About 95% of that goes to things we have no control over. In fact, 16 agencies of the state we fund, and that's $138 million of our $200 million funds state mandated programming for the state of Kansas. We would get around $5 to $7 million with the Ad Astra. Under the old city-county revenue sharing programs and LAVTR, we would have had a little bit more than that. So we're going to cut our mill levy by about 2/3 of a mil to a mil, depends on what we would get. Again, I think it's a great thing for the state to provide some funding. In fact, this year alone, we're talking about spending $1 million this year for the tag office because Treasurer can't charge more money, and it's actually underfunded. and we have to use the property tax funds to backfill that one now. So at the end of the day, a little bit of funding from the state, which incentivizes us, and it's a little bit of money, is actually going to keep our mill levies low.
Chairman, I don't want to get off the topic, but we did pass a bill out of the, that we are looking on helping the treasurers with that legislation. So, yeah, I'm glad to say Chairman Smith and myself have been fighting for that for some time, so hopefully we'll get it this year. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question would be, do you trust the state to fund this? As a commissioner, you've had experience.
Well, and I appreciate that question. In the previous hearing, I do know when the state runs low on money, they'll say, notwithstanding this law, we're not going to fund that. That's exactly how the previous demand programs were defunded, and then we just stayed with it because it was hard to go backwards, you know. So I think that is a huge risk, but I think that at the end of the day, if you don't provide funding, that $7 million, I'm going to have to raise our mill levy to backfill that. So there's a ebb and flow. You guys provide funding from the state. That funding, I think, comes from income taxes and sales taxes. I don't have to levy property taxes. And I promise you, our goal is to keep our tax levy as possibly low as possible. And if you guys provide some funding, we're gonna make sure that goes into the mill levy reduction. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I'll stand by.
Thank you. Committee, we're going to start with the opponents. Dave Trobert.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Dave Trobert, CEO of Kansas Policy Institute. We are opposed to House Bill 2396 because it eliminates the revenue neutral process, which is working very well. I know that there were some people in the House who believed, and maybe some in the Senate, that revenue neutral isn't working. I would ask you first, just rhetorical, just think about this. How many government entities in your jurisdiction did not raise property tax before revenue neutral? I'm guessing it's a pretty small number. We just completed the analysis of the 2025 revenue neutral. This is the list. It's about 70 pages of taxing authorities that either did not exceed revenue neutral or they imposed less than a 4% tax increase. It's a lot of large entities, like there are Wyandotte County, Riley County, Ford County, and 44 others did not exceed revenue neutral for this year. This is the action taken in 24 for 25. Over 200 cities did not exceed revenue neutral, including Kansas City, Salina, Hutchinson, Leavenworth, Emporia, Lewisburg, Liberal, Abilene, Junction City, and Spring Hill. If 2396 passes, the 2,300 entities that did not exceed revenue neutral will raise taxes by probably at least 4%, 3% inflation, and all the exceptions that are being discussed. The 500 entities that were below 4% will probably go up to that limit. So you've got 2,800 entities that will be raising taxes. There are maybe 450 entities that are this year, between 4% and 10%. You might have an impact on those. They might change their behavior because they would break even with the payment. But there's most of the other 300 entities that imposed more than a 10% increase. I doubt that a lot of those behaviors would change based on not just past history, but what you just heard this morning of they're going to spend what they're going to spend, and they'll just adjust the variables to do that. Leavenworth County is an example of that. And I know we hate to keep picking on Leavenworth County, but I didn't start it. In 2024, they increased property tax by 9%. That was $3.6 million. If 4% was their limit for the trigger for the payment, that would have been $1.5 million, and they would get $1.1 million. So they'd be taking in $1 million less. You have to ask yourself, what's the likelihood that a lot of those entities that are doing 10, 15, 20% property tax increases, will they change their behavior? We don't think so. in summary, revenue neutral is working. It is actually doing what was just discussed. It is constraining government spending. 2,300 entities in last year did not exceed revenue neutral. This has been pretty consistent. It was 52% in the first year. It's been in the 50s. Now it's 62% of the taxing authorities not increasing. Those are all going to be looking at tax increases. So this is working. We would encourage you to either reject 2396, or you could fix it by putting revenue neutral back in. And if you wanted to give a carrot, make it for holding revenue neutral. You incent the behavior you want. I understand government, just like everybody else, has inflation. But people have inflation, and then government wants to add a bigger tax increase on top of that. They have plenty of opportunities to operate more efficiently. They are sitting on, collectively, billions in cash reserves. There are a lot of opportunities, and so we hope that you would consider all those, and I'll be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Dave. I have to say, I think this is the longest testimony I've ever seen. How many pages? 70?
Well, 69.
There you go. Thank you. Committee, any questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You pretty much indicated right there at the end, Mr. Traubert, but I want to make certain you're saying that Kansas Policy Institute's opposition would go away if revenue neutral was reinstated in this legislation, in this proposal?
We do not believe that a carrot is necessary. Revenue neutral has done the job. I'm just saying that if the body would see fit to have a carrot, it should be tied to holding to revenue neutral, not raising taxes by 4% or more.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Did you? Okay. Next is Representative Partial. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Samantha Potter Partial. I'm a state representative representing District 6, which is in Miami County. And thank you for allowing me to speak in opposition of HB 2396. The best tax policy is often simple and easy to understand. Unfortunately, that is not the case with this policy. To put it simply, this is not good tax policy. Regardless of this being portrayed as a win for taxpayers, the reality is that the only 1-2 punch the Kansas House did for property tax was removing the transparency and the accountability required for taxing jurisdictions. HB 2396 has 3 parts. I can go over them, but they've been already gone over pretty much in detail already. So I'm just going to go into the most frustrating part of this legislation is we were given a graph on the House floor that showed that we had the largest tax increase in recent history, and other than in 2006 when it comes to property taxes. But what was left out within that graph was the inclusion of the 20 mil and the 1.5 mil base, which is what was hit directly from the appraisals. So you're going to see that property tax reflected in that graph, as well as the fact that it didn't take into consideration the economic impact of the government shutting down during COVID, the record high appraisals, and all of the other issues that we faced with inflation over the last several years. And then when it comes to Johnson County, I think this is a prime example of what is wrong with this legislation. In 2024, the CPIU is 4.2%. Johnson County increased the property tax by 9.81%. The Astor Fund would, if it would have been available at that point in time, they would have been able to receive $12.2 million from the Astor Fund. They raised taxes from over $23.1 million. So they already had, let's see, $13.2 million that they had over the CPIU, which kind of negates from the $12.2 million if you can tax higher than what the state's willing to give you. And then also, in order to have a successful petition countywide in Johnson County with a 10% requirement, it would take around 34,000 votes. And that is over 1,000 votes per day when it comes to the petition to get them back down, not to their previous year's budget, but to the inflation rate. And then when it comes to Miami County, the county I live in, which is a completely different story, I think revenue neutral, one key point is the activism that is actually caused in the counties that are willing to go out and vote for the change. We flipped our county commission and we flipped our local school board with USD 368. We now have a 3-2 majority when it comes to property taxes on the county commission. And when it comes to USD 368, we have a 4-3 majority, which allowed Miami County to stay revenue neutral and allowed our school district actually to go 2% below revenue neutral. So thank you for allowing me to testify, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Representative. I'm so used to calling her friend. Our districts intersect. So any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And I can vouch for those elections. They made a difference. Next up is Jim. And I would say you pronounced it with a French accent, but my friend says Benage, so I don't think you're related. Welcome back, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And just to clarify, some of my own siblings go by Benage, so we are conflicted on that, but I have 6 siblings, so there's a few of us around. So good afternoon, Madam Chair and Senators. So my opposition, or our opposition to this bill, is just a few technical things. Actually, we think it could be fixed. But there are some things that need to be done. So one of the big issues is that it exempts schools, and schools are about 50% of our property tax. You know, you're gonna do that. You've almost eliminated half. Well, you've eliminated basically half of what you're trying to accomplish here. I think taxpayers are probably not going to see the difference. They're not going to appreciate that. So there's serious concerns with what this does to bond ratings. That could affect every county, municipality in the state if you don't take care of that. Our bond counsel gave a 3-page testimony that I've included in the packet, and I think it'd be behoove you to read that. He does have a small technical correction in there to address that issue, and I think that would be a good thing to do. So a few specific changes that I am suggesting is, I think in section 1A2, where you're proposing this threshold for a protest petition, I think it needs to be higher. I think it needs to be 20%. And the reason is pretty clear. This is an aberration of our representative republic form of government. You're telling a small group of citizens they can override the decisions of elected officials without a public vote. Nobody's voting here, okay? We're just driving a petition. That is an aberration. And so if you're going to do something like that, and I understand because of timing, that was the reason that was thrown in there, you need to make that bar very high because that in my community, we're about, we had 5,000 voters in the last election. That would be 500. We had to get 1,000 to override the elected officials. It fails, and this is a technical issue, it fails to define the period of time of inflation factors. That needs to be specified, and I suggest 12-month period ending in June of the current budget year that you use for your inflation factors. Then section 1B2, I suggest you take out this whole building new construction thing. That's fictitious, that those new buildings have no tax history. So well, you're going to increase from what? Okay, so that leaves it very ambiguous what you're trying to accomplish, and just say get rid of that. But instead replace that with a formula that I've proposed for how to account for growth in population, because that in itself will tell us where what we need to accomplish there. And then I suggest removing the schools on Section 1C for the reasons I already talked about. In Section 5, I suggest allowing counties and cities where they have websites for their legal publications to be allowed to do that for these as well. So I believe you have full text in my testimony. I apologize. I think the heading had the wrong bill number on it. It was 2396 and it said 69. So sorry for the typo. There's a proposed markup there for you as well. So so that's all I have to say. Be happy to stand for any questions.
Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Is there any other proponents? Any opponents? We do have one neutral, Spencer Duncan. Welcome, Spencer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be incredibly brief. So as you can see, I have members who are opponents of this. And you've got some testimony, I think, that show we've got members who are proponents and neutral. And so I think then it becomes my role to not just navigate that, but as you have to figure out whether this is good policy or not and make your own decisions. Question before us that we tried to analyze is, if this becomes law, do we believe it's workable for the cities? Right? That's the prism we have looked at it. And the short answer to that, I just want to tell you today, is yes, but I want to refer back to the concern you've had from both proponents and opponents regarding the bonding issue. If you look at Mayor Benaj's testimony, if you look at Wichita's testimony, you'll see some pretty detailed concerns that they've laid out, much smarter people than I. And I think all those testimonies and mine offer you suggested language you could include in this bill to sort of correct that issue. And so that's kind of where our neutrality lies, and that's all I wanted to bring to you today, Chair. Keep it short and sweet.
Thank you.
Yep.
Committee, any questions?
Thank you.
Any other neutral? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on 2396. Committee, I'm going to turn your attention back to 5011. If there is no objection, I would like to work this legislation today. Just for consistency, Amelia, would you mind giving us I'm sure everybody remembers, but still.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, as you hopefully recall from this morning, House Concurrent Resolution number 5011, as amended by House Committee on Taxation, is a proposition to amend Section 1 of Article 11 of the Kansas Constitution to propose that on and after January 1 of 2027, the taxable valuation of 3 subclasses of property would be determined based on either the lesser of either their fair market value or their average fair market value. The 3 subclasses were residential real property, commercial industrial real property, and mobile home personal property. And the question would be submitted to electors during the November 2025 election.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, questions for Amelia? Seeing none, what are your wishes? Senator Pat.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The Senate has taken a position on a constitutional amendment to control property taxes. We passed previous in this session Senate Concurrent Resolution 1603. We amended it on the floor, and after the amendment, then it passed with substantial margins. Since we have a position, I'm going to make a motion, Madam Chairman, that we strip the contents of HCR 5011 and insert the contents of Senate Concurrent Resolution 1603 as passed the Senate Committee of the Whole. Now, I don't know how the wording would be as it relates to, is this a substitute resolution or just?
I would leave that up to the revisers. Amelia?
If it were the will of the maker of the motion, I believe we could do a Senate substitute for.
I think that would be cleaner.
It definitely is, yeah, I don't necessarily want the confusing language in the bill, so it would be a substitute, Senate sub for House Concurrent Resolution 5011, okay. And then the language, again, committee would be, as passed the Senate Committee of the Whole, we've all voted on that in the Senate, 1603, and that would be my motion, Madam Chairman.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second on the motion? It's been moved by Senator Peck, seconded by Senator Clump. Discussion on the motion. Senator Owens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Personally, I stand in opposition to this because I stood in opposition to 1603, and that hasn't changed. My concern with going back to 1603 is that it doesn't actually do anything. We're going to be back in what I believe is the same boat of leading taxpayers to believe that because their appraisal only increases 3%, that somehow their taxes are only going to increase 3%. And that's not the case. And while I can't say that I love 5011, I'll be totally honest, I would at least say that this provides maybe some smoothing of the edges. I personally don't believe that this is a constitutional issue. I'll be totally honest. From the proposals that I've heard from the House and the Senate, I believe this needs to be dealt with through policies such as 2396 or some variation thereof. So I'm going to stand in opposition to this, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Schallenberg.
Thank you. I would assume I would agree to some extent with the esteemed senator from Harvey. However, both of the constitutional amendments do the same thing. I mean, they basically require a mill levy for it. What I like about this is that it's conferenceable. So now we've got a Senate position and we've got a House position, and I'm confident that if the leadership of the committees are so willing, a compromise can be reached in conference committee. So I'll support it. Thank you.
Senator Clamp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also agree with Senator Schallenberger and the ability to make this conferenceable with talented individuals from both the House and the Senate. I think there's something good that can come out of it. And I also would say that of 121,000 doors that were touched in this past election cycle, by far above 90%, the ones that answered questions were about property tax and the relief of the the growth of appraisals. So something should come out of this brain trust that is something we can deliver to our voters.
Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to stand in opposition to this because I think we're getting late. The hour is late in the legislative session, and we're playing real brinksmanship here. The House has already said they're not interested in 1603. Now we're trying to force their hand with this procedural tactic. I think that's going to do nothing but just get their back up, and they're going to be even further unwilling to consider it. So I'm just not willing to gamble. It seems like there's significant support for 5011, and that to me feels like a little bit like a bird in the hand, maybe imperfect, may not do as much as some of us would like, but I think this is a real gamble and trying to force this down the House's throat. They're just going to get their back up, and they're going to not really play ball with us. So I don't see this ending well, and we're getting very close to the end of session. So I'm not going to play this. I'm just not willing to gamble and play that kind of brinksmanship. Thank you.
Any other comments, discussion? Do you want to close on your motion, Senator?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would caution freshman legislators from agreeing too much with certain senator across the way. Just like to lighten it up a little bit ever so often. But in any event, I do think that Senator Schallenberger said it very well. This is conferenceable, and we will get together with the House. The House did not take a vote on 1603. I don't know if they even had a hearing on 1603. This will allow them another opportunity to take a look at 1603 because it is in a House shell. But again, it is conferenceable. I think that it's probably going to be the best way for us to provide real property tax transparency. I'm not going to use the word relief, Senator Owens, but transparency for our taxpayers and to help hold local units of government who assess property taxes more accountable. So with that, I would move my motion, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. So we've heard the close on the motion. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay? No. Motion carries. What would you, to pass out? Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would move that the Senate Assessment and Taxation Committee pass HCR 5, Senate substitute for HCR 5011 and recommend it favorably.
I'll second the motion. It's been moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay? No. Motion carries. Would you like to be recorded? Senator Owens would like to be recorded as a no vote. Motion carries. Committee, let's turn our attention now. We will come back to 2396, but I would like to take a look at a couple other bills first. I've been asked to look at 259.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill 259 relates to income tax and provides for future income tax rate decreases contingent on exceeding certain inflation-adjusted revenues. The bill provides for possible decreases in income tax rates based on a formulaic calculation of whether the general revenue fund collections for the prior fiscal year exceed an adjusted base year revenue with calculated increases for inflation.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, there is an amendment. Amelia, do you mind handing that out? Amelia, would you mind explaining the amendment? It's quite simple. We heard testimony to it. I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Madam Chair, if you recall the details of the Senate bill, the provisions would have applied to income tax rates, both first to individual income tax rates and then to corporate income tax rates. This particular proposed amendment that has been handed out would also add privilege tax rates, which are taxes that are in lieu of income tax for our financial institutions.
Thank you, Amelia. Questions? Seeing none, what are your wishes? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We heard during testimony from the Kansas Bankers Association that they would like to be included. We had previously, in previous years, mistakenly and inadvertently excluded them on some of the legislation we passed. I don't know how we keep dropping the ball and leaving the privilege tax on the sideline, but they requested, and I think it's a good idea for us to add the privilege tax in along with the income tax and the corporate income tax. So I would move that we amend the House or Senate Bill 259 with the balloon that was presented.
It's been moved by Senator Peck, seconded by Senator Schallenberger. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Committee, what are your wishes on the bill? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would move that the Senate Assessment and Taxation Committee pass Senate Bill 259 as amended favorably and recommend it favorably.
Is there a second on the motion? It's been moved by Senator Peck, seconded by Senator Klemp. Discussion on the motion. Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to stand opposed to this. I think the reason is I think it ties the hands of future legislatures, and I've always been opposed to that. I think there's nothing sacrosanct about having a base year of 2024, and I think all we're doing is tying the hands of future legislatures to make decisions about tax and spending policy. I think that's a key function of why we're here each year, is to make those decisions with fresh sets of eyes, with new legislators. And I, again, think about what happens if we have a legislature who decides that they really want to fully fund special education, or what if we have a legislature who agrees that the KBI needs a new headquarters. We're sort of tying our hands to this 2024 base year in perpetuity. And again, I think there's nothing sacrosanct or special about that. So I'm going to stand opposed to this. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you, and I want to support it for the same reason. Our hands need tied. If you look at the budget of this state over the last 5 years, it's gone to the moon. The only thing that will keep a legislature from spending money is to cut taxes. And any time the legislature wants to spend more, all they have to do is introduce a bill that says, notwithstanding the provisions of this, we're going to spend more. It's a simple step to jump through. They do it we do it all the time. So I support this.
Any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion? We have a motion and a second. So all those in favor of the motion? Aye. All those opposed? No. Would you like to be recorded? Motion carries. So three things at once. So I'm back on track. We're going to turn our attention now to Senate Bill 283. After Amelia, then I'll, thank you. Amelia, will you give us an overview?
Madam Chair, Senate Bill number 283 would decrease individual income tax rates, discontinue tax credits of the High Performance Incentive Program, or HPIP, and the Kansas Affordable Housing Tax Credit. It would discontinue payroll withholding tax benefits of the Promoting Employment Across Kansas Act, or PEAK, and it would also discontinue certain credits, it would discontinue the crediting of certain amounts to the Job Creation Program Fund and repeal certain tax credits that have not been used recently.
Any questions for Amelia? Thank you. Senator Starn.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Amelia, would you hand out the proposed amendment on 283, please? And while she's handing it out, just highlighting it's things we've heard, obviously, property taxes. The other thing heard a lot is affordable housing, and I believe this amendment can help both sides win in this scenario.
Would you like Amelia to explain? Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the proposed amendment that was handed out would be an amendment to the low-income housing tax credit provision. And what it would do is it does a couple different things. One is that it provides that the existing tax credit would continue to apply for those allocations that were made pursuant to the 2023, 24, or 25 qualified allocation plans. It would then create a new, well, it would create a tax credit. It would continue the tax credit in a subsection A2 moving forward, beginning with tax year 2026, that would limit the tax credit to an amount equal to 70% of the federal tax credit amount instead of 100%. It would also apply only to those receiving the 4% federal tax credits, not the 9% federal tax credits.
Thank you, Amelia. Questions? So I have a question. Do you have the out years of the financial that this would be obligating the state for?
I do not.
Amelia? Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yes, sorry. There was one other thing in the new provision going forward, the 70% limitation also just for the 4% credit developments, but also the credit period, instead of being 10 years, would be 5 years.
Thank you, committee. I'm not sure. Wait, are you aware that we're over $750 million of state obligated money with that housing tax credit? And this could possibly take it as high as 100 million in the out years?
Yes, I'm aware. In the situation, I'm trying to create some sense of equity and help with the affordable housing piece, as well as create some income tax relief.
Senator Owens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. So LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit, is something that's being discussed in Commerce. Just for perspective, there is a bill there that I believe we plan on working today that calls for its elimination altogether. I do know that there's an amendment that will severely restrict it there as well, just for perspective. You know, as we're debating and having conversations on all of these tax credits, one of my biggest concerns with just blanket eliminations is, have we all individually had the time to evaluate each one of these programs to understand how they work, why they work, what their intended purpose was? And LIHTC, for example, the difference between the 4% and the 9%, understanding even how that functions. And I mean, it took me hours to understand it. And so I understand what you're getting at. You're trying to, as I understand it, restrict it back down to keep that fiscal note low, which I'm certainly not opposed to. I'm just concerned that there hasn't been enough discussion in this committee about LIHTC and how it operates is all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other comments? We're on the, do you want to make a motion? Senator Ware.
I agree with Senator Owens.
So I
There's not
realize
enough,
we have new members.
We haven't had enough time.
We have new members on the tax committee. I realize it's new to you. There are legislative post audits out there that are available on all these programs. I have tried to bring you up to speed as quick as possible with the time allowed. I'll say my math teacher used to say something about spoon feeding, and I appreciate it. We've tried to give you as much information as you can to make these decisions. Senator Starnes.
I move my motion, or amendment, I'm sorry.
Okay, is there a second on the motion? It's been moved by Senator Starnes, seconded by Senator Owens. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You somewhat asked, but how difficult would it be to get a fiscal note or an approximate fiscal note?
I think we would have to have one before we move on it. But I don't think they can get one between now and maybe tomorrow. We could pick this up tomorrow.
Madam Chairman, I thought our
Let's
staff was crack staff that could.
They are crack staff.
We could try to get an estimate for you by tomorrow. This is the first I've seen this though, but we can certainly try. I just can't make any guarantees.
I don't know if I support this amendment or not, honestly, because I understand and appreciate the intent and but I just don't know what the dollar figure is. So I would be a no if we had to vote right this minute.
That's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid it would fail. Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you. Is this I'll ask the carrier of the amendment. Is this the same thing that they're talking about in Commerce, the same amendment that they're trying to make to the? No. Okay. Thank you.
So, Senator, would you withdraw your motion and the second withdraw, and then we will pick this up tomorrow?
I would.
Okay, thank you. So it's been withdrawn by the maker of the motion and the second. So committee, I'm going to turn your attention to, we're going to lose the room here, committee. Let's take a look at 2396. I would like to look at 280 also. So which one would you prefer first, 280 or 2396? 280? Okay. Amelia, do you mind? So committee, based on time, and we do need to get out of the room because the Commerce Committee will be meeting, and all we're doing tomorrow is working legislation. We are not having a hearing. I would have liked to have looked at 2396 today, but we will take a look at it tomorrow, and we will look at 280 and any other legislation previously heard. And I'm giving you a warning again. We're having the hearing tomorrow on Senate Bill 39. Please read through it because I would like to, if the committee is willing, work that bill that day. And then we will be finished for the 2025 session. Is there any other business or questions to be brought before us? Senator Clown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is it Senate Bill 39? Is that the number you said? Okay, very good. Thank you.
We have the hearing tomorrow on it. Okay. Any other business questions? Committee, thank you for your work today, and I'd like to thank O'Donnell Consulting for lunch today. So thank you.